Asha, as you all know, through her foundation, Motwani Jadeja Foundation, has done amazing things to take this legacy forward, to ensure that India finds a rightful place. We prepare our young generation ready to take on the world. She has been spending a lot of energy and resources at the World Economic Forum in Davos, at the Munich conference, at the Milken Institute, and her program Mitli at the Stanford. And she also has been very generous to sponsor this whole track for us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome my co-chair and the leader with a lot of courage and passion, Asha Jadeja Motwani.
Thank you, Mateen Syed. Mateen is, I don't want to, I want to make sure you guys know that Mateen is the heart and soul of TiE, and he's been with us for, over 25 years, and without him, we would not have the structure of this conference. So, Mateen, thank you for that generous introduction. The reason we are here today and the reason we are putting in this effort to make sure that we speak to you at TiEcon about what are the major factors that are sort of changing the way changing the way India aspires to be a global player. And what are these factors, and what kind of opportunities and challenges does it arise because of these new global forces? So I want to distinguish between two forces that are creating a sort of unprecedented historical moment, which gives us a chance as Silicon Valley to play a critical role. My own goal today is to make sure that you guys who are here in the audience and those of you who are going to be watching this video later recognize that we are not just about startups and technology. We are about playing an active role in shaping the destiny of US-India relations. You are the people who are going to be instrumental in shaping this destiny, because the opportunities are unprecedented. And I want you to be aware of them, and I want you to know that you have the agency to make a difference. And I want you to plug into what we are doing, even as a foundation and as a Silicon Valley diaspora team here. So the two kind of factors which are shaping this historical moment are global factors and domestic factors within India. So what are the global factors? As most of you know, America has pivoted already pretty significantly away from China. This is a huge factor in its, in its reach and outreach to India, in its wooing of Prime Minister Modi's office and the team. There's a very aggressive outreach going on from the United States, from Washington, D.C. to Delhi. And why is this so? It's because we recognize that we are disentangling as a business, we Americans are disentangling our economic, defense, and geopolitical ties that we've had with China. The historical ties that we had with that part of Asia are coming under pressure, and as a result, what we are seeing is there's an unprecedented departure of businesses from China into other parts of the world. And of course, the top players are India, Brazil, and Vietnam. And India is competing with these countries in making sure that we land these American businesses into India. We land these financial opportunities, venture capital opportunities, private equity. So there's growth of capital, there's flow of capital into India, there's flow of businesses, American businesses into India. So that's a massive first global geopolitical kind of factor that is shaping this rise of unprecedented opportunities. These opportunities in our language, in the language of Silicon Valley, would be in defense tech, it would be in social media tech, and it will be in US-India ties on AI. So these are the things that I'm going to be speaking about with my panel today. I have a really unusual panel of people who understand the geopolitics of what's going on. On the domestic factors, there are two things going on in India, and I'm going to have some of my speakers about this, but in general, the first thing is the digital public infrastructure that we have. Once again, this is something that the planet has never seen. We have a nation of 1.4 billion people who are now plugged into this digital public infrastructure provided by the state. And the second is sort of a rising of a civilizational sensitivity and awareness in India, where people are saying there are strengths of our civilization which must not be minimized. And those strengths are visible in how we are doing here in Silicon Valley as a diaspora. So these are the topics that I'm going to cover with the esteemed panel here, and I'm going to have all of them give 30 seconds about who they are. So let me invite my dear friends and people who've given generously of their time. Mukesh Aghi, who is the head of USISPF, which is the US-India Strategic and Policy Corridor, based in Washington, D.C. Mukesh, please come on up and join us. Mukesh has been working in tandem with the Prime Minister's office in making sure that we are closing on a whole bunch of policy initiatives that are going on, including something called ISET. I want you to keep in mind this term ISET, which is the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies. As you do your own startups and you do think of ideas that you want to sponsor, this is an extremely important area, ISET, and catch hold of Mukesh later after this talk to talk about this. The second person is J. Sai Deepak, India's most popular author. Jay, please come on the stage. Sai Deepak is one of India's rising young authors who is shaping the dialogue of what it means for Indian civilizational strengths to be recognized, to be celebrated, and to be proud of. Even in the diaspora, we are seeing a lot of these strengths that we speak with. So Sai is here, and I know many of you have been mobbing him before this, so feel free to catch him after the panel. Then there is PK Gulati, my friend and little brother who's visiting from Dubai. PK is a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, does angel investing, runs a maker lab in Dubai, and somebody who is extremely closely tied to what's happening in the US-India corridor and in the India-Dubai corridor. So, and the last but not the least is my favorite young angel investor and entrepreneur, Satyan Gajwani, who heads the Times of India group. Satyan heads the digital initiative of Times of India, one of India's most powerful media outlets. I want this team to speak about things which are non-usual Silicon Valley things. And so thank you all for being here, and let's get started. So if I've missed out anything in your introduction, you must please 30 seconds each to say who you are and how you know TiE.
First of all, thank you very much everybody for coming on the afternoon, the first session of TiE. I am exceptionally happy and proud to be here, having been a part of TiE and having...
Bring the mic closer.
Being a part of TiE and having known TiE for the last 25 years, I know the power of this network, and we reflect the network of what Asha spoke about globally. I have been based in Dubai for many years now, and I see it from a different angle, beyond the corridor, and I see the power of the Indian network globally. And I will share my thoughts on how I believe the next century, which is going to be the century of the East, will be led by India.
Well, I represent US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. It's a not-for-profit organization focused on policy between India and the US. We deal from geopolitics to economic to immigration to people issues. And we work very closely both with New Delhi and Washington, D.C.
So I moonlight as an author, but I don't think that word should be used for someone who doesn't earn his livelihood from writing. I'm fundamentally a litigator with intellectual property, antitrust law, and constitutional law forming my areas of core practice. So the legal fraternity knows me as a subject matter expert when it comes to these subjects. The non-legal fraternity thinks of me as some kind of a civilizational ambassador. I'm not sure that is entirely correct. I'm here to try and present my positions both from a constitutional, civilizational, and an investment perspective, and let's see how the convergence works.
Hi, I'm Satyan. I'm part of the Times of India group. I oversee the digital businesses as well as a lot of what we do internationally. In particular, we have a very large focus on North America and the United States. We run Willow TV and CrickBuzz, and we're part of the sort of founding group for Major League Cricket. We think of cricket as one of the important ways in which we'll see India's sort of capital expand globally. And then obviously the Times of India group is a large media group in India with a very long 184-year history. And through the last 20, 30 years in particular, I think we're starting to really see the growth of the domestic sort of capital and power of the Indian consumer, political bodies, whatever it may be, but also the growing international impact and influence of India. And we think of ourselves a little bit as a voice for that.
Let me start with Mukesh Aghi. So Mukesh, what are you seeing as India starts becoming more of a global power? It starts exercising its muscle in the global realm. What are you seeing in terms of sort of US-India partnership growing on what fronts is it growing? Is it growing on AI? Is it growing on defense? And what do you think are the opportunities and challenges that we will see as Silicon Valley and what we should be paying attention to? Because these are things that are going to unleash huge amounts of capital. And the example for that would be something like the CHIPS Act of the US. I think it's a few $1 trillion CHIPS Act that we have. And, so when you work with Washington, D.C. and Delhi, what kind of things are you seeing, Mukesh, that you think will create opportunities for us here in the Bay Area?
Well, Asha, what we are witnessing today is for the first time in human race, a democratic nation of 1.4 billion people has shown a exponential growth in the economic arena, growing 7-8%. Its economy is now touching $4 trillion. Now, it is still a very small when you compare to global GDP, which is around $105 trillion. So we are still around 3%, 3.5% of the global GDP. But more important is what we are seeing is the challenges India faces as it tries to grow its economy. One of the biggest challenges it faces is China. China, in every aspect, will never treat India as an equal partner. And that's where what we are seeing is an alignment taking place between China and the United States. US, for the first time after Second World War, is facing an adversary. When you look at Soviet Union, it was a military power, not an economic power. When you look at some stage, Japan was challenging US, it was an economic power, but not a military power. China is a military power, economic power, and a technology power. And basically, its objective is to basically dominate, starting with the Asia Pacific. It sees India as a challenge, and that's where India has to find a balance to continue its economic trajectory for the next 20 plus years without having war with its neighbor itself. It shares a border of 3,000 kilometers, which has been disputed in and out. And Chinese do realize that. And so what they're doing is a 1,000-cut strategy. They moved 100,000 troops on the border. India has to move another 100,000 troops live. So it's eating into capital defense budget. It's spending less on capital investment, more on operation, and that's Chinese strategy. But US sees India as a pivotal partner. It basically has more joint exercises than any other country in the world, India and US. That's number one. So much more closer collaboration, cooperation taking place on the military side. If you look at what's happening in the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, both the Americans and the Indians are patrolling quite aggressively in the arena itself. India has almost 14 ships, around 8 submarines down in the ocean itself. But on the economic side, the trade has gone up to $200 billion. India's ambition is to take it to $1 trillion itself, and we're working on that, and I think that's doable, feasible, both in the mid to long term itself. We're looking at students. We have around 272,000 students in the US, contributing $9 billion in tuition fee and other aspect. Our objective is to take that to 500,000. And there's a reason behind it, because most of the students, 70% go into STEM program, and we'd like to use them because we have massive shortage of STEM program engineers, educated people in the US. But then coming to people, we have around 5 million Indian Americans in the US and around 1.2 million waiting to get citizenship. The per capita income is closer to $170,000 compared to the average American, which is around closer to $75,000. So their spending power is much, much higher. So I think what we are seeing is a closer cooperation from geopolitical side, military side, economic side, people-to-people side. And we see this momentum continuing both mid to long term between the two countries itself.
So, PK, you and I were talking about this at TED, that we should stop looking at India as a geographically defined nation state, because India is here too. I mean, we are here in a big way in India. The Indian diaspora is here in a big way, and we are connected in profoundly important ways to India. Not only through our startups. Many of us, like myself, who are in venture capital, we are investing in Indian startups. We are bringing Indian startups here, and sometimes we are even enabling mergers and acquisitions, right? So India is now sort of an idea which is fairly global in its reach, rather than sort of a nation state which is defined within the geographical boundaries of India. You're sitting in Dubai, PK, in a vantage point which is different from all of us. What are you seeing as sort of the opportunities and the challenges as we go forward, and as India rises in the global visibility and its aspirations as especially as a leader of the of the Asian region?
So, Asha, there are two distinct viewpoints or distinct points that I'd like to make, and which actually make India look smaller than it is. Its influence can be far bigger, its opportunity is far larger. The first thing is, people think of India as the 1.3, 1.4 billion people and a box in which it resides. The opportunity resides in the boundaries of India. I think the opportunity of India is far beyond its boundary. We all sitting here are the opportunity outside the boundary. We are sitting out here. So we tend to restrict ourselves on that, and I believe we have to look at beyond. So it's not the US-India partnership I want to talk about. I want to talk about a global India partnership. It's far bigger than that. US-India partnership is very important. It probably is one of the anchor partnerships, but it's far beyond that. People sitting here, is your business only in India or US? It's far beyond. You go beyond that. So I think that is one thesis that I believe we should start thinking about, and we can think what is the influence we can actually make. The second thesis, which I sincerely believe in, is we've got to remember one of our biggest advantages as a diaspora sitting outside India is majority of us are first generation diaspora. First generation diaspora means a lot of us here were actually born in India, even though we don't live in India. So our relationships obviously tends to be far deeper. Our association tends to be far more connected. Our friends are still working there. Our friends are still friends in power, or they can make a difference. So all that actually makes our possibility of influence far, far bigger than would be from, say, for example, the Irish diaspora of New York, which is now third generation or fourth generation. So they do identify, but that identification is actually far behind. What that does to us is give us an opportunity which is far larger than what it appears to be. And it could be anything. You mentioned a few areas of this. That's just the beginning. I think we'll, as Indians, we'll influence everything. Cricket, Bollywood, culture, all these soft powers that we talk about, they will actually multiply, provided we are able to look at it from a point of view of being wider, or thinking beyond our boundaries and welcoming everybody in.
Okay, so listen, this is all, excellent. We are all, happy that there is this US-India partnership growing. There is India is aspiring to be a global player. India is aspiring to be a $10 trillion economy. And this is all great, but we are also hearing murmurs within India, where we feel that India is waking up as a civilizational state, right, with its strengths. I recently had a very close friend of mine from Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., who went and spent an hour with Prime Minister Modi. And, his name is Walter Russell Mead. And Walter, when he was, sitting with the PM, said, look, what's happening in India? How do I get a flavor for what's going on in India? And the Prime Minister told him to go and look at, Varanasi. And said, you go see what's going on there and look at Ayodhya. Now, the thing is that this is something that's very important in the Prime Minister's mind and in his team's mind. And there is, I think there is a waking up of India as a civilizational state, which says, look, we are not just 70 years old. We are 3,000 years old. We've been around for a long time, and our value systems are what's creating a very important part of the global DNA of growth and of unity and things like that. But is it also creating divisions within India that we should be aware of? And divisions are normal, natural, and healthy. Question is, are we speaking about it in a constructive way in which we engage everybody into inclusive dialogue? And that question I'm going to raise with Satyan later. But first I want to go with Sai Deepak, who is an extremely important voice in India in his thinking about the rise of India as a civilizational state. Deepak, what do you have to say about this?
So first of all, thank you for giving me an opportunity to discuss this subject as part of an unusual setup. I mean, seldom do people realize that culture and economics don't operate in silos, but they go hand in hand. And that, I think, is the realization or the story that India is going to present before the world. Whenever a society rises, it's not just a question of its economic rise, but the one thing that you end up asking is, what is it bringing to the pool of human thought? What is the India way? Mm-hmm. What does it represent? What is the idea that captures Bharat? So that is an essential question to ask, because according to me, even technology is driven by a vision or a value. Ultimately, there is a thought that results in an idea or in the fructification of a particular product or a service. So the first thing that I think Bharat represents is its fundamental belief in conflict resolution. Its way of addressing conflicts is very different. When you think of the Indian diaspora, by default, I think that's been the global experience. You're looking at an education-oriented, law-abiding, peaceful people. That is not a function or a quality of the diaspora. It is a function of being Bharatiya. Okay, so that's what you bring wherever you go. So that's one of the reasons you're not seen as troublemakers, by and large, hopefully. So that value, I think, is central to the idea of Bharat. Second, obviously, Bharat at this point is trying to reclaim its identity, its cultural agency, and its political agency. Because political agency without cultural agency is merely to apply the tools of the colonizing master at the past to try and create a future. But do you have something else of your own to use to forge your story ahead? That's the question that we're asking. When you do that, obviously quite a few civilizational issues and legacy issues are bound to surface. Now, either you show the guts and the maturity to address those problems, and you try and be as inclusive as possible when you have this dialogue. But you must realize that inclusivity or inclusiveness is a two-way street. All you can do is to open the door. But if somebody doesn't want to enter that door, then they've taken a decision already. That shouldn't stop Bharat from addressing those issues. If you don't do so, one of the things that I suspect, and I think that's been abundantly on public display for the last half a decade or so, is that your growth story is constantly going to be hampered by legacy issues. You can build as many bullet trains as possible, but it will be subject to stone pelting simply because you have not resolved certain outstanding issues. So I am very clear about the fact that Bharat cannot hope to forge its path ahead purely on economic lines without addressing certain civilizational issues. That, I think, is what will ultimately give it the currency to sit on the high table of big powers. Because if you're internally weak, no matter how much you project strength outside, there is a fundamental hollowness to your strength or to your being, which will continue to plague you. And it could also hand leverage to people who are interested in seeing India crash. So I think it's all the more important for Bharat to address these problems. It can only hope to offer a peaceful resolution to these problems. But should people not offer, or let's say accept the carrot that is being offered, it must have the guts, the confidence and the political will to wield the stick within constitutional lines, both within Bharat and outside of it. I'm someone who's very clear about that, because ultimately it's not the constitution that dictates the destiny of a people, it is political will and the people's will that dictates the journey of the constitution itself. The constitution, after all, is a product of people's will. So I hope that Bharat finds a way to address its economic necessities, because it is extremely crucial given the hostile environment it lives in. And it also addresses problems within, because that gives it the ability to spread its wings and not necessarily to flex its muscle, but hopefully to contribute to problem resolution, which the entire world faces at this point. Because Bharat, I think, has the strength to offer critical solutions to issues such as climate change and other aspects. And you need a calm mind contributing to these ideas without being divided in political camps as to whether climate change is real or not. If it is a real issue and if it is a concrete issue, then you need a calm set of minds to work on it. And I think we present some of the finest brains when it comes to the subject.
So thank you for that. I think you're right about this, Deepak, that the stability of India is critical as it flexes its muscle as a global power. And, and I think it looks like, I mean, I'm not guessing on what the results are likely to be in the Indian elections, but let's say if the BJP comes back, which is likely to, if it does come back, we have 5 years of unprecedented stability and growth ahead of us. In which case, of course, we are looking at opportunities in AI, in software, and the usual verticals that we are all aware of. But in terms of bringing this conversation back to, what kind of stories are we telling? Satyan, you have an unusual perch where you are based here, but you also are the head of Times of India Digital. And you have an unusual sort of view and a snapshot on what's going on and on storytelling that we are telling ourselves, on conflict resolution, media narratives, and freedom of the press. What is your sense there? Is India on a stable path to maintaining those incredibly important democratic values that we've had all these years, and is it on the path to strengthening those?
It's a good question. I think one of the interesting things that is unique about India right now from a media landscape and from a communication landscape is there was a study done a couple of years ago about how optimistic are citizens about the future of their country globally. And India actually ranked higher than any other country globally in terms of their own citizens' perspective on the prognosis of their future. As a media outlet, we feel we have a balanced responsibility of being a reflection of the spirit of the country, as well as oftentimes being truth to power and things of that sort. But if you take a sort of macro lens, I think, generally the narrative is positive. Obviously, that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges and problems, and we have to find the balance between those. But when we look at media in America, for example, there's an enormous amount of division, and it's hard to find something that you feel gives an objective and representative perspective of the broader American story. You feel like there's this side and that side, and your job as a citizen is to sort of navigate those. And at least we feel like our role in India is not to be, one way or the other, but to be reflective of the broader story of India. And so that's what we try to do. I think the angle that I think is most interesting, which, I think if Jesai spoke about the connection between economy and culture. I think the other connection that's interesting is between politics and economy. And well, for example, the story we all will talk about and you'll hear 100 times is about the India stack and the digital India stack and those capabilities, and that's definitely a hallmark of it. But if you look even with a slightly longer lens, I moved to India in 2008, and when that happened, it was right when the financial crisis of America was blowing up. And India navigated what should have been a global recession far better than almost any other country, because it had more responsible and prudent fiscal policy at that time, and RBI was a little bit more, didn't let lending get out of control. Even in the last recession that happened, India fared better than other markets did. And today, I think the thing that's really interesting is, at least my old perspective, and I think a lot of people's was, if you want a very decisive and sort of faster moving government, you have to accept more dictatorial or less democratic institutions in places like China or Singapore, or markets where you'll see a lot of action, but not necessarily a lot of democracy. And so then democratic countries like America and India, well, they're great, they're democratic, but they're pretty slow moving, they don't really make big change, they're built for stability more than anything. And I think what you've seen more so in the last 5 years than in before is you're starting to get a good mix of both, which is that you have a very democratic setup. India is still the biggest democracy in the world, but you really see a political machinery that is responsive and proactive. I think about, for example, we have a lot of investments and operations in fintech. And the amount of policy evolution that's happening around financial services in India is breathtaking, to the point where you feel like the regulator is as current as the latest startup. Whereas here you watch congressional hearings and you see congressmen asking CEOs how to fix their Wi-Fi. It's like a completely different ecosystem of the political economic connections. And so, what I think gives us that sense of general optimism around India is that you've always had a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. You've usually had a political system that was either negative to neutral in terms of supporting that entrepreneurial spirit. And today it feels like at worst it's neutral, and in many cases it's positive in terms of being an enabling factor for a broader growth story. So, I guess to answer your question, yes, there are challenges. There are, as a media company, we always have to balance this responsibility of being truth to power, but also being, able to represent the bigger picture. But overall, the bigger picture is really strong, and that influence starts in India and it expands into, the Indian impact politically, culturally, economically, globally, and we obviously have a lot of things that we're doing here to that effect as well.
So with all this, the optimism and the momentum that India is experiencing right now, how inclusive is our growth, Sai? I wanted to ask you, do you feel that rural India, for example, or Indians belonging to tribal spaces, this is a huge population, and of the Indian population, probably more than 50% is rural. How included do you think rural India is feeling about this growth story? For all of us who are in the West, and we are interacting with Delhi, and we are talking about digital infrastructure, and we are talking about the India stack, do you think people in unusual pockets of India, especially in the rural areas, in the agricultural, perhaps even in certain Muslim pockets of India, are they feeling part of this growth story? And if not, what is it that we can do to make sure that they are part of the growth story because they are India?
So just allow me to build on what the previous speaker said, and I think that's a fantastic point to make. See, in all these years of independent India's existence, the one thing that has kept the boat afloat are state institutions, and especially nationalized banks. We actually fail to appreciate the stability that they've provided to India, especially in difficult times. So some of those institutions have kept the larger scaffolding, let's say, intact. So what was missing is the policy push to ensure that the private spirit is enabled as much as possible. And that, I think, has changed post-1991. So that's one. Second is, imagine the tragedy of a situation where you start questioning the functional utility of democracy because it seems to come in the way of economics. Okay, so that is the kind of silo that we were being pushed into. And finally, you're looking at the possibility of an expeditious decision-making process happening within the fold of a democracy. And therefore, at a point when China was beginning to question the utility and the longevity of the democratic model itself, and the rest of the world was beginning to ask whether it's possible to remain democratic and compete with China in different realms, Bharat is providing the answer to it. So I think that speaks volumes, first, not just of the state institutions, but the commitment of Bharat as a society and as a civilization to the democratic spirit. It's not something that has been imported. According to me, that's latent and inherent to the Indian culture. That's one. Second, Mr. Modi's success, and I remain someone who will certainly vote for him or who has voted for him with a fair degree of stinging, scathing criticism on multiple levels. Nevertheless, his strength has been his focus on the basics. The digital stack was never meant, according to me, to empower the urban elites. It was meant to actually create an inclusive economic model where people who did not exist in bank statements and other statements finally begin to surface. So their existence has been made public, so to speak. People don't realize how much of value Aadhaar has brought because it's become a point of convergence. It still remains a significantly flawed system because it also enables a lot of people to get documentation which they are otherwise not eligible for. That's a different story altogether. But nevertheless, what this has done is to empower the rural Bharat. Second, the success of the last 10 years is less about the numbers and more about attitudinal change. The can-do spirit, according to me, is no more limited to the urban English-speaking spaces. And that doesn't mean that the rest of the country is beginning to learn English. It means they're comfortable in their skin and they're interested in contributing to the economy, speaking the language that they're otherwise comfortable in. That's most important. 3, as part of my public engagements outside of my professional commitments, I make it a point to go to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. And I know for a fact that there is a huge attitudinal shift and there is a huge talk of startups in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, not just the Bangalores and the Hyderabaads of the world. That, according to me, speaks volumes. 3, at a time when people underestimated the average Indian's ability to be comfortable with technology when the digital stack was being introduced, the rural Indian has proven that his native intelligence is at par with the best in the world when it comes to being comfortable with technology. Not just that, I think it is ultimately a function of necessity. And when they realize that it makes them part of a larger economic circle, they embrace it, they adopt it. From the autowalas to the vegetable sellers to everybody else, the PhonePe or the UPI system is ubiquitous, according to me. And this tells me something, that a society or a civilization that's been traditionally and unfairly associated exclusively with snake charmers is proving the world wrong at the most fundamental level possible, where rural Bharat is embracing technology like no other country or no other jurisdiction. So scientific temper is not something that we need to be pontificated about. We know it, we have it.
I want to sort of zoom in a little bit from this 3,000-foot view we've been speaking about, zoom into things like ISET. Mukesh, can you please tell us for a few minutes what is ISET and why is it that companies and startups which are going to be in the defense tech space, whether it's semiconductors or supply chains, and even AI-related software. Why is defense tech likely to be an emerging sector that venture capitalists should be aware of and paying attention to? And can you tell us a little bit about ISET and I2U2 and what are these things?
Well, when Prime Minister Modi in June came on a state visit to Washington, D.C., the US and Indian government signed a set of agreements. And one of them was ISET, which is basically partnership in the critical emerging technology. It could be quantum, could be AI, cyber, or basic manufacturing of GE jet engines in India itself. And the overall objective was twofold. One is India is 62% of its platform today, defense platform, is Russian. How do you basically take off India from that platform and not necessarily get on the American platform, but make it more independent? And when you look at, I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, India started exporting generic drugs to the United States. Today, it has around 30% of the US market, bringing billions of dollars in savings. In fact, we have a czar in the White House who talks to us almost on a daily basis. We need more cancer drugs. We need more of these drugs coming into the US to make sure the cost and supply are sustainable. We see moving forward 20 years from now, as defense becomes more and more software-based technology, India will bring the cost down on defense technology and be the same, play the same role as the generic drugs itself. What we have done in the space, for example, we have around 200 space startups, as companies such as which are basically focused on building a platform, monitoring all the debris in the space. So US companies have started adopting, accepting, and bringing them into the in the US environment. So I think you will see much more collaboration take place in quantum. IBM is working with Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore to take that forward itself. So there is a series of technology partnership which are going to be win-win for both countries, because in the mid to long term, as the population ages, there's a shortage of technical resources in the US. You will see US depending more and more on India from a critical technology perspective. So that's the whole objective from an ISET perspective itself.
But in terms of unlocking of funds, right? Unlocking of just these incredibly important initiatives like the CHIPS Act and like ISET, what kind of, how do you think that this is going to unlock capital, not just for startups, but also for startups who want government as a, you know, as a client? Mukesh, what do you think? Do you think government as a client is a viable situation that we are looking at here because of things like ISET and the CHIPS Act?
So what we are seeing is we're working with a lot of Indian startups, bringing them to the US and getting them all the approvals to get the government spending into those startups. It's a closed market, it's dominated by large US companies, but I think we are seeing slowly clawing their way into that, and that's moving along. As far as Indian defense spending goes, I would say just ignore that for time being, because it's very limited, it's very bureaucratic, very slow. I think the opportunity is the US as a market, opportunity is the US defense as a market itself, and that's where our focus is. But more important is if Indian economy is going to grow from ISET perspective, if Indian economy is going to grow as a country, it needs international capital. Without that, that economy is not going to grow. We're talking roughly, just in the infrastructure space, almost $3 trillion. Where is it going to come from? Yes, US is putting a lot of money, US companies are putting a lot of money, but we're seeing a major momentum building up coming from Middle East. The Saudis, the UAEs, the Qataris are putting in, and the Japanese are coming in quite aggressively. So I think India will need, on the average, $200 billion capital every year for the next 20 years to maintain that momentum of growth.
Thank you. I'm going to, so speaking about the Middle East, PK, I'm going to close this panel with you telling us a little bit more about what is happening between between India and the Middle East. Are you seeing more sort of startup, collaborations happening? Are you seeing M&As? What's happening on the funding side? Are these friendly environments where startups can locate and find markets in the Middle East? What's your, from Dubai, what is your vantage?
So Asha, again, I have been there for the last 30 years. I went to the UAE from the US, and I've seen that pathway strengthen more because of the fact that UAE or the Middle East looks at India and the US both as opportunities. Mm-hmm. So from both sides, if you look at it, it's actually a corridor which, I always say Dubai is the best place to do business from. If you look at its economy, it's minuscule. It's probably not even worth a state in India. And when you look around, the ARPU, if you look at, the average return per user or average revenue per user, it's usually 10x, usually. So when you look at it from that perspective, it kind of becomes a very good starting point from there. Add to it the aspect of opportunity on India's side and availability of capital, because they have diligently kind of looked at capital as an incentive to invest in. So larger investments are available. If you, I don't know if people know where Sam Altman was last week, and people would hazard a guess he was either in Saudi or in the UAE looking for his $7 trillion. So on a more serious note, there is a very defined corridor which, with political will, Mr. Modi has made a very extensive effort to build that relationship between the Middle East, or strengthen that in the last few years, and add to it the fact that all you measured out, the whole geopolitical plus opportunity aspect of that, there is a massive opportunity there. Mm-hmm. To add to it, also remember one of the things that, Sai mentioned was the issue about Indians being the, let's say, not troublemakers. They are seen as friendly people who take people along. And that is a very big strength that we have. So, initiative like I2U2 you briefly mentioned, it is anchored on I and you, India and Israel, as the sources of a lot of talent and technology, but US as the biggest market, and UAE as somebody who would fund it and will be a place to do business from. That actually shows you this is the kind of direction things are taking. And I see that happening more and more. I'd like to mention, somebody mentioned, the UPI stack we mentioned, and we again look at UPI stack from a solution to an India problem, in the sense India had issues with identity, India had issues with payments, so we solved with that. But remember, 2 days ago we rebranded it as Citizen Stack and launched it for the world. This is where Bharat comes in, that we don't even, so there's lots of problems that we solve them well, but we share it with the world. Great. And that is where the opportunity generates.
Okay, this is great. So we just have 1 minute left, and I see Mateen staring at me. So I'm going to wrap up this panel, actually, and make sure that we have time for the next panel to come in. It's also an Exponential India panel, and it's just some phenomenal speakers there, including some of my portfolio companies and some of my angel investor friends. So please stay on here. Thank you so much for attending this.
Thank you very much, Asha, and thank you to all the panelists for this fabulous job showing the geopolitical spot. We just take a group picture before we get off the stage. Thank you.